Hello guys, welcome to Matura Express. My name is Victoria and today we'll be talking about signposts and connecting ideas, all in the topic of traveling and tourism. Stupid. Sorry, I seem to be having some kind of technical mutant. Okay. Okay, first I would like to give you some overview of what we're going to talk about, or what the structure of our course for today is. So first I would like to talk to you about how to give a proper presentation, what to watch out for, and well, to succeed in your A-levels. Then I will be talking about what signposts are and why you should use them. So I will make you a list of it. Then I will give you some examples, of course, and then we'll try to focus on disadvantages and advantages of tourism, where I looked up an article on the internet, and then we try to use our examples or signposts on this article. Okay, so if you may switch to my computer, thank you. So I wrote the heading down, signposts and connecting ideas. Okay, so first, as I mentioned, I would like to start by showing you how to really give proper presentation, because when you're talking in your A-levels you have two presentations, and one will be kind of a monologue and the other one will be a little bit more of a discussion, but anyway you have to talk to your audience. So when you're preparing for your exam, I think it's really important to have a kind of structure. So you need to think about, okay, what am I going to say in the introduction, what will be my main points, maybe some examples, and what will my conclusion be. And it has to be well structured, and well, you need to know what you want to say and what you're going to do. And you need to watch out for the time limit, of course, so it has to be in a certain time frame, which can also be quite challenging because maybe you have more to say than you have time. Then you need to have enough of information available for you in order for you to talk about this topic. And as I already mentioned before, you need to know how much detail are you going to put in to your presentation or into your exam. And I think examples are very important, but don't put in too much or don't get hung up on the examples. So you need to watch out for what you really want to say. Okay. So as I already mentioned, you have to have some kind of structure in your presentation or in your exam, and it should be clear. So I would like to talk about the instructions. I'm going to zoom in order yes, this is, I think, perfectly visible for you. So in the introduction you give like a roadmap that tells your audience what you're going to tell or what you're going to talk about in the following, so in your main part. So of course you need to tell them what is your topic, what is the issue you're going to discuss, and maybe also you could say your opinion in the introduction, but I would keep it in the conclusion. And here on the right hand side you already see some introduction words. For example, I'm going to talk about, today I'd like to discuss, and you could also maybe tell them why you're interested in this topic, but you could also keep that for the conclusion. Okay, so Now we come to the body, which is a little bit larger, of course, you can see here. So the body of the presentation, or the core of the presentation, should contain your main arguments, why something is good or bad, or you can also list advantages and disadvantages. And you should provide some examples, as I already mentioned before, but try to stick to the general things you want to say, or to your general arguments. And as we already can see on the right hand side, it says that you should use verbal signposts to guide your audience through the presentation. So signposts are something that helps you to structure your presentation, and it helps the audience to follow your thought or your presentation. So it gives kind of like a roten Faden, what you would say in German. Here are already some examples what a signpost could be. Like, another point is, a contrary view to consider is, in conclusion. So, and then we come to the conclusion, which is basically you summarize everything you said, but you try to paraphrase it, so you don't use the exact words which you said before. Of course, you have to repeat yourself, or some words which are important for the presentation. And there are also some or a way to connect ideas in order for your audience to follow you, and to follow your thought process. So signposts are basically an aid for the audience to follow you better in the way you present yourself. Okay, so for now, I hope giving a presentation or taking an exam is clearer for you, because I think it's really important to have a structure, and people often forget in the exam because they are nervous, or because, I don't know, they didn't revise how to give a proper presentation. They forget to give a proper introduction so that people really know what you're going to talk about. And I think this is really important. Okay. So, okay, as I already mentioned, signposts are a way to connect your ideas and to give structure. Okay? They give you structure. Okay. There are different categories of signposts, and I would like to go through with you because I think it's important to have some kind of basis of maybe 3 or 5 signposts of each category, and if you just vary them a little, I think you're off to something good. If you want to introduce, for example, a topic, for example, or points of arguments, to introduce arguments, you could say that firstly, secondly, thirdly, and so on. So I'm sure you already heard about those. You could also say, if I give you an example, firstly, I would like to talk about the advantages of tourism. The first one is that tourism helps the economy in the certain or in the specific area a lot. Then secondly, I would like to talk about the disadvantages of tourism. And okay, no, rather, okay, I have to correct myself. First, you should say that you have, for example, 3 arguments for something, for mass tourism, for example, and you would say that firstly an advantage would be, secondly an advantage would be, and so on. So if you have, for example, an advantage and a disadvantage, you would rather say on the one hand, on the other, or whereas, and so on. But we'll look at that later on. Okay, so you could also say, to begin with, initially, next I would like to talk about the benefits of traveling on the health. Lastly, okay, so I think those signposts are enough for one presentation, so you don't need to know all of them. So, but it's good for you to have some kind of repertoire for you in order to feel to vary those words a little more and to feel more safely in your presentation. Of course, you can also use these signposts in a written exam. So when you're writing an essay, I think you need to be even more aware how to use these words and to vary them more often. I think when you're talking in an exam, people don't realize that much when you repeat, for example, when you repeat yourself that often. Then, when you want to cross-reference, to other parts of your speech, so I also think that it's really important that you emphasize your ideas, your main important, the most important arguments, and this can also be done by repeating them. For example, you could say that as I mentioned before, or as I discussed before. So you're really emphasizing those things you said before. As I mentioned before, as stated previously, as I discussed before. So, as I already mentioned before, I'm giving you 3 to 5 signposts or words for each category in order for you to use these in the proper sense, how they should be used. Because I think there are a lot of signposts or different words which you could use, but sometimes this is also a disadvantage because you feel lost. So many words, and I don't really know how to use them. So I made a specific choice of these words which you could use, and you can be sure that you will use them in the proper way. Okay, sorry. To add an idea, and I'm also writing them down for you in order to really know how it's orthographically written, or to look them up, of course, or more detail. To add an idea or more detail. So of course, if you have any questions, or if you know a signpost and you're not really sure how to use it or in which context, you can of course comment, and I will try to respond. Okay, so in addition, moreover, do also. So these are really basic signposts which you should already know, but still. Additionally, in addition, additionally, which is just the adverb. Additionally. So you can read that right. Okay. You can read that?
Yeah.
Okay. Equally, furthermore, besides, and so on. So I think with these 5 or 6 signposts, you're really good to go. I'm trying to think of an example with furthermore. Tourism is contributing to a thriving economy in a specific area. Furthermore, it also gives people a chance to come in contact with other people all around the world. So, furthermore, weiters. To give an example, so I think this is something very important. So that you not just only say, for example. Of course, you can say it once or twice, but maybe you can vary your expressions a little bit more. As an illustration, this is not too bad. Illustration. Then we have, for instance, and maybe the last one, to demonstrate. So if you have 3 of these examples, I think you're good to go in your presentation. Then we have to focus on specifics. In more detail. Okay. In particular, specifically, and what we also have especially. So this should be used when you really want to emphasize something. What I did not mention before is that these signposts, which are in a certain kind of category, for example, to introduce a sequence of points in your argument, are very, very similar in meaning. So sometimes there's little difference in meaning. So they can practically or nearly used as synonyms. So there's basically no difference, or just a small one, for example, in especially, specifically, in particular. So they are interchangeable. To generalize, okay, as a rule. So, in general, of course. Usually, so you could say that tourists usually prefer warmer holiday destination than colder ones. For the most part. And in most cases, in allen Fällen, oder fast allen cases, in fast allen Fällen. Cases. Okay. So you can see that there is a great variety of these signposts. Next one, to introduce a comparison. Or further point to support your argument. Further point. Compared with whereas, in like matter, but in like matter I didn't really use that one before, so I just put it in brackets. Similarly, okay. For example, tourism, the term tourism in general has a good connotation, whereas the term mass tourism is usually connected with kind of a negative meaning. To introduce a contrast. So I'll just like to go back to introduce a comparison. I would also advise you to use on the one hand, on the other. For example, on the one hand, traveling is is very important for your health. I don't know if it's true. On the other, it can also cause a lot of damage. But you don't really need to pay attention on the sense of the sentence, but how I used it. Okay. To introduce a contrast or alternative point or section. In contrast, nevertheless, classical, but however, yet although, for example, I need to think before I speak. Although tourism is generally seen as something good, it has also some downsides. Also, like in German, obwohl. And we have to introduce a fact. So as you can see, we have a lot of different categories. Evidently, it is evident that. So this would be kind of a whole introductory phrase. Clearly, do we already have some comments?
No.
Okay, because I asked a question before. So, obviously. And maybe a last one, naturally. So, let me think of an example. It is evident that nowadays people like to travel a lot to different countries. Okay, to rephrase. Or explain, okay. In other words, namely, to be more precise. I'm sorry, it's not clear. To be more precise. So, as I already mentioned before, it's really important for you to emphasize your ideas, and this can also be made by repeating your ideas, but not in the same words. Maybe you should try to paraphrase, also umschreiben. You should try to paraphrase it a little. Then we have two more categories. To introduce a reason I'm going to delete that. Thus, due to hence this is also all in the direction of folglich. Therefore, as a result. So let me think of an example. Due to a lot of pollution caused by tourism, it is seen as something negative. Okay, so thus, due to, hence. And due to is always with a noun. For example, due to the pollution, due to the rain, due to the traffic jam, and so on. So it's always with the noun phrase. Okay, and now we'll get to the conclusion. To conclude, you can also use different kinds of signposts. In conclusion, to summarize, and I have a question for you. Do you know the difference why sometimes summarize or in general words with S or Z? I think we had something before, but I'm not sure. I don't remember it exactly. Or to generalize, why sometimes it's written with an S and sometimes with a Z. Do you know the difference? And if you know, you can of course write it in our chat. To summarize, finally, and to conclude. So you could say that to conclude, I would like to re-emphasize my point that and so on. Okay, so my last paper. So I would like to tell you that in general it's important, I think, in a presentation to have some kind of structure which can be achieved by using signposts. But I think you shouldn't overuse them, of course. They should have a specific place in your presentation in order to guide the audience through your talk or through your exam. So this is also the reason why I only gave you 3 to 5 or 6 signposts, which will be enough for your presentation, for your exam, of course. So try to use them right and don't overuse them. Okay. So as we're now in the topic traveling and tourism, I looked up an article on the advantages and disadvantages of tourism. And they have a good list with some arguments for and against tourism. So I would like to write those down in the notebook, and then I can provide you some examples on how to use them or how to connect these ideas with signposts. Okay. So, traveling and tourism. So, plus is the money. Then it provides jobs. I'm going to underline that. It raises the profile. It raises the profile of the certain area. It provides a chance for investment in infrastructure. Investment in infrastructure. For a place, it can provide economic incentives for a place to preserve, regenerate, and provide upkeep in their urban and wildlife areas. So how can we summarize that? Sustainability, maybe? Nachhaltigkeit? And visitors promote international links which can provide more business and cultural connections in the medium to long term. Cultural interactivity. So, these are the pros. And now we'll have the cons. I'm going to write them down here. Ooh. How do I get back? Whoop. Okay. No, I'm going to list them just beneath the pro arguments. Environmental damage. So, tourism can often cause environmental damage with things like pollution and forest fires. The commercialization of culture can undermine the soul of a tourist destination. Local traditions that have a rich cultural heritage is Erbe, are reduced to wearing costumes and putting on acts for the tourist in return of money. So, commercialization. Of culture. Tourists can often lack respect for local traditions and culture, not following local dress standards, getting drunk in public, or behaving rudely or inappropriately towards locals. So, I'm just going to write down rude tourists. Then, although often jobs are created by tourism, most are relatively low level, such as bar work, hotel service, restaurant serving, and so forth. They also have little prospect, Aussicht for promotion. How should I paraphrase that? Lack of prospect, for workers. Tourism jobs are quite commonly seasonal and insecure with no extra benefits such as pensions, sick pay or health care. So again, tourism, which I'll just write it in brackets seasonal job. Money can end up being directed to tourist areas when it could be used more effectively elsewhere in a country. The locals who don't live in specific tourist areas miss out and suffer relative decline. So decline in rural areas. So maybe 1 or 2. Okay, we only have 2 left. Oftentimes, most of the tourism industry in the developing countries is actually owned by big foreign companies. They make the major profits, leaving the local business with relatively little benefit. How could I paraphrase that? Big companies. Companies own or profit. Profit is better. Okay. And then there's often an imbalance where it becomes so successful that other forms of income generation are neglected, and an economic dependence on tourism forms. Dependence on tourism. So I'm just going to go with the first argument, money. And I think you could connect it with the argument big companies profit a lot. So you could say that whereas tourism creates a lot of money and income for the people living there, big companies profit the most. Or tourism creates a lot of economic uprise as people spend or tourists spend a lot of money in these certain kind of areas, which then furthermore, this provides also a lot of jobs and possibilities for the people living in that specific area. So this was another type of signpost. So first I made a compare and contrast, and here the second one I made a follow-up idea. Then it raises the profile, with which argument could we use that? Although tourism raises the profile and in general the image of a specifically visited area, it also creates a lot of environmental damage. For instance, there's a lot more pollution. There's lots of more noise pollution, for example, and you could, in your presentation or in your exam, you can then get more into detail. You can give more examples. Then you could also say that tourism provides people with the chance of meeting people from different cultures. For example, when someone from Europe, from France, for example, travels to, Southeast Asia or the other way around, they kind of have the possibility to share their ideas or the way of living with each other. So it gives you an opportunity to get to know people of other cultures, to be more sensitive that there are a lot of different cultures all around the world. What you could also say in connection with cultural interactivity, although people have the ability to be able to interact with people from other cultures and other countries, people are also very often confronted with rude tourists, which are not aware of the etiquettes of a certain or specific area, how to behave, how to drink, or how to eat. And maybe one last. Then you could also say another disadvantage of tourism is that it leads to a commercialization of culture, which means that, or for instance, people dress up as with costumes and their cultural cloths and clothing, and this will be exploited for money. So it leads to as I already mentioned before, to a commercialization of culture, which in my opinion is not a good thing, or I don't think good of it. You could say, you could also put your own opinion into that, but try to be specific and try to give some examples. Okay, and then one last. Whereas, or better, although tourism can create a lot of opportunities for people living in a specific area, it also creates some kind of dependence on tourism, where, for instance, other sectors of people working somewhere else will be neglected by the pressure of tourism. Okay, so could you switch to the big screen? I think that was a lot for you today, because you have a lot of signposts. My advice is that you just maybe for each category you should know at least 3 of them, so you have some kind of repertoire which you can use then in your exam, and then I think you will be fine. And the most important thing is that you have a clear structure, so try to give maybe 1 or 2 introductory sentences, then come to your main part where you can really elaborate your ideas, your arguments, and then maybe have 1 or at least 2 or 3 sentences in your conclusion. Okay, so thank you for your attention. I hope it was helpful for you. We'll see each other next week, and well, I wish you a nice evening. Bye.